Welcome to Sports Spectrum. I'm really excited for you to hear Mickey Weston and his story today. He's the chaplain for the Chicago White Sox. He's the executive director of UPI. He's a former Major League Baseball pitcher, and he's got quite the journey and the story to share right now on Sports Spectrum.
This is Sports Spectrum, the intersection of sports and faith, where we bring Jesus back into the conversation. Here's your host, Jason Romano.
Hey guys, welcome to the show. I am Jason, and this is Sports Spectrum. Our website is sportspectrum.com. Make sure you go check that out for all of our content. Bookmark that website. Every single day is a great day to go back to sportspectrum.com and see what's new, including a devotional each morning at 6 a.m. Eastern, podcasts from all of our podcasts on the network, including Get in the Game, Recalibrated, Table 40, and of course this podcast, Sports Spectrums, are all available right there at sportspectrum.com, and then tons of stories and articles and different write-ups about your favorite athletes and coaches and those in the sports world intersecting with faith in Jesus Christ. That's our goal. You can check them all out at sportspectrum.com. And we are presented today by Compassion International and their Fill the Stadium initiative. Last spring, most of the events that Compassion International relies on to help sponsor children in crisis were canceled due to the pandemic, and that left 70,000 kids in desperate need of help. So the Fill the Stadium initiative was launched by Compassion and our pro athlete friends to stand in the gap for these kids and their families in crisis. And I'm here to report now, as we are now into the spring of 2021, that we are 70% of the way toward our goal of filling a stadium worth of kids in crisis and releasing them from poverty. 70% of the way. So that's an amazing accomplishment. That is something to be praised. But at the same time, there's still 30% left. There's still a ways to go, and we need your help. So check out fillthestadium.com to donate right now, to give and help release these kids from poverty and their families. Fillthestadium.com, a stadium that cannot remain empty. Compassion International, fillthestadium.com. Mickey Weston is our guest today on Sports Spectrum. This is an interview I've wanted to do for a while. Mickey's a great guy. I've met him multiple times at different conferences and events that we are a part of with Sports Spectrum. Mickey is a former Major League Baseball pitcher, selected in the 12th round of the 1982 MLB Draft by the New York Mets. He spent about 7 years in the minor leagues with the Mets, was then acquired by Baltimore as a minor league free agent, and in 1989 made his Major League Baseball debut, June 18th, 1989, with the Baltimore Orioles. He played 15 seasons in minor league baseball and parts of 5 seasons in the majors with the Orioles, Blue Jays, Phillies, and the aforementioned New York Mets. Now, Mickey is living his life in baseball for a greater purpose. He's the executive director of UPI, Unlimited Potential Incorporated, a ministry that helps minister to Major League Baseball players. He's been there since 1996 and is now currently in his 18th season serving players as a team chaplain for the Chicago White Sox. So Mickey is in the locker room doing ministry with these baseball players every single day, every single week, in and out of season. So this is a guy who came up in the minors and found his call while he was still playing, that God was leading him into ministry. And ironically, as he mentioned, taking a little white baseball and sharing the name of Jesus through that opportunity of having played in the majors. Mickey Weston's our guest here today on Sports Spectrum. You're going to love this story. Take a listen. What's up, Mickey? Welcome to the show, buddy.
Hey, Jace. Great to be with you this morning.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm excited about this conversation. And I need to start at the beginning for you of your professional baseball career. And I don't know why I didn't know this. I don't know why we've never talked about this when we've been in person together at some different conferences. But you were selected by my favorite baseball team way back in 1982. And when I saw that, I was like, okay, 12th round pick, 82 draft. What was that 82 draft? Well, that was Dwight Gooden, if I'm not mistaken, picked number 1 overall. And I'm a huge Mets fan because of guys like Dwight Gooden and Darryl Strawberry. Do you remember that day being drafted? Take us back to what it was like to be selected by the Mets.
Well, interesting, because I'm from Michigan, so I knew zero about the Mets. I grew up a Tiger fan.
Yeah.
And so even when I got drafted in the 12th round, I had to ask my pitching coach with Eastern Michigan University, hey, what do you know about the Mets? And he said, well, I think that they've got some needs. Well, obviously he did not look at the draft that year because Dwight Gooden went number 1.
Yeah.
Floyd Yeomans went number 2. Randy Myers was the supplemental pick.
Yeah.
Round two was Roger McDowell.
Yes.
And then they traded that summer for Sid Fernandez and Ron Darling.
Turned out okay.
Yeah. For some people, it turned out okay. It created a log jam in the minor leagues.
Right.
And so I ended up spending 6.5 years in the minor leagues with the Mets, got up to Double-A, spent 3 years in Double-A.
Jackson, right? Was it Double-A at the time?
Jackson, yep. I was going to run for mayor if I went back there the next year. So I spent 3 years and finally made it up to Triple-A my last year with the Mets. Had an incredible year. That's the year I developed a sinker. Glenn Abbott, my pitching coach, worked with me for a year.
Okay.
Developed a sinker, and then a year later I was in the big leagues with the Orioles.
Wow. It's so interesting when you think of paths and journeys. And, you're a man of faith, obviously. You're the chaplain with the White Sox, and we'll talk about your journey to Christ in a second. But just thinking back, I always tell people we never really know God's plan until we look back. But when you think about your journey and you're going through it with the Mets, and then all of a sudden it's June of 1989 and you're making your debut, but it's not with the Mets, it's with Baltimore. Isn't it interesting how it kind of all, worked itself out and you had to kind of go through it? I'm imagining those minor league years were tough. Like you said, the mayor line makes me think, man, you were just kind of tired of being in Jackson.
Yeah, well, there was an article that summer that actually labeled me as the grandfather of the Texas League.
Wow.
It's interesting as we were pursuing Christ. I was married to my wife Lisa at the time, and we just saw ourselves as missionaries in the game. And really, I thought that was probably going to be my last year of playing. I'd already taken the GRE and was set to go to grad school at Georgia State University, get a Christian counseling degree.
Yeah.
And yet the Lord just kept us in the game. And to the point where I developed the sinker, and the trajectory took off. I just didn't have a major league pitch at that point, and then developed a major league pitch, and then ended up playing for another 8 years.
How do you develop a sinker? Like, I'm fascinated just as a fan. Like, what is that process like? And maybe it's changed today. Maybe it hasn't. You're around the game, so you know this. But how do you develop a new pitch? Is it somebody showing you how to hold the ball, how to release it, and then you having to go repetition after repetition just to get it right?
It really was. Glenn Abbott was a former major leaguer. Abby pitched for Seattle, Oakland, but he had showed me his grip on the ball, and it was a pressure sinker between your thumb and index finger. And I've got my mama's hands. I've got little hands, but it's almost throwing it or holding it like what a guy would hold with no seams.
Okay.
And it was actually one day in Tulsa, Oklahoma. The minor league pitching coordinator was in town, and I was throwing with Abby, and I felt it come off my finger just the right way, and the bottom fell out. And the pitching coordinator looked at me, Al Jackson, and he said, "Can you do that again?" And I'm like, "I think I can." And seriously, from that moment is when everything took off, because I ended up winning the ERA title in the Texas League, got called up to Triple-A at the end of the season, and dealt there, did super well, became a minor league free agent, and Al Jackson, the coordinator, became the pitching coach for the Baltimore Orioles.
Relationships. It's all about that, right?
And so he called me over there, and in June 18th, 1989, I got called to the big leagues.
All right. So I want to talk about that day because it's always a fun day, but I do have to go back because you mentioned you came up with the Mets. So I'm wondering, Dwight Gooden was drafted in 82. I don't even know if he pitched in Jackson, thinking out loud. I think he went from low A to triple A in the playoffs to then suddenly in the major. I'm just trying to remember now as a Mets fan.
Yep.
But in 84, obviously, is when he burst on the scene at 19 years old and won the Rookie of the Year. The next year he has the incredible year and wins the Cy Young. Were you in camp with him? I have to imagine you were, and saw him at a pretty young age. Did you recognize, oh my gosh, this guy's pretty special?
Oh my goodness. Yeah. You knew it right away. The first time I met him was in Little Falls, New York, right after the draft. He came up and made one or two starts there. But I remember sitting next to him on the bench, and he had a gold tooth.
Yes.
And I remember, and I was pretty naive at the time. I didn't know things like I know now. But I said, "Hey, where did they sign you?" He said, "Oh, they signed me out of the penitentiary." And I'm like, "What?" Yeah, I was pitching to the pen, and so they came and they signed me. I didn't know this dude was like the bomb. The bomb. He was like incredible. He signed for $100,000.
And in 1982, that's a lot. I mean, it's a lot of money now, but that's a lot of money.
He was one of the first guys to get a 6-figure signing bonus. And so next spring training, he's in high A. He goes from rookie ball to high A.
Yeah.
For 83, and then the next year he's in the big leagues.
Yeah, and he's young. He's 17 when he gets drafted, and you're meeting him, and he's giving you that penitentiary line. He's 17 years old.
He was something else.
Wow.
He really should have been a Hall of Famer.
Yeah, he was on the trajectory, that's for sure.
Yeah, no
but
doubt.
It's interesting to think about that 80s teams too, the names that you mentioned. I mean, you and I could probably talk for an hour about the 80s Mets because you were in training camp with them. So you saw these guys kind of developing and working through down in, where was it? St. Petersburg was where the Mets were?
We were in St. Pete. Yeah, we were in St. Pete.
Before they moved to Port St. Lucie. What was it being around those 80s teams, especially as you were in there till 88 or so? So you were around when those teams were starting to be the bomb, right? Turning to be the biggest deal in New York and maybe in all of baseball. What was it like being around and seeing talent like Gary Carter and Darryl and Dwight Gooden and Keith Hernandez and just the swag that I have to imagine was present around that organization at that time?
And that's a great way to describe it. There was a swag. Really, you started to see it coming up in 85. 85, it was really starting to put it together, and then obviously 86, it all came together. But Kevin Elster, Greg Jeffries, a lot of those guys. Straw was a couple years or a couple levels ahead of me. I think he was in Double-A when I got drafted. But their development came quick, and they had all the pieces together. They did a great job putting it together. And it really was like a logjam. The other guys we were watching the guys advance, but there was no place to go. They had so much talent at the upper levels that if you could stick around, you were hoping that maybe another team would see you.
I remember when Greg Jeffries broke through. Did you play with Greg at all? I mean, he broke through as a very young kid as well, and people thought this is going to be the next. I mean, he had a great career. He played a long time in the major leagues, but he was the prospect, the next guy for the Mets, and he came up in 88 and took the world by storm. And then suddenly, after 70 at-bats, he was starting in the playoffs in the National League Championship game. Did you watch that progression take place with a guy like Greg as well?
Yeah, I played with Greg in Double-A, and I had never seen a hitter with an eye like him. The best eye I've ever seen. In a Double-A season, he had 55 doubles, 20 plus bombs, and batted close to 400.
Switch hitter. Yeah.
Yep. And it was just the key was his glove. They couldn't find a position. Some guy said that his glove was made at U.S. Steel. But that was his big deal, was just trying to find a position for him. He could flat out break. No doubt about it.
Let's take a quick break from our conversation here on Sports Spectrum to tell you a little bit more about Fill the Stadium and our friends at Compassion International. Now, you know about Compassion. They are the most trusted child development ministry in the world. All that they do is about children and releasing them from poverty. They do it all in Jesus' name. And now we have this Fill the Stadium initiative that's been going on for more than a year now, and we're making such amazing progress trying to fill 70,000 empty seats with children who are in crisis. 70,000 kids were left without an opportunity for food and shelter and clothing and all the basic necessities that children should have. Normally, they would get sponsored in a regular year, but the pandemic wiped all of that out. And so now you can come alongside myself, our friends at Compassion, our pro athlete friends, and help fill the stadium and release kids from poverty. You can go to the website, fillthestadium.com, to donate right now, fillthestadium.com, and let's release these kids from poverty. Let's reach our goal of 70,000 filled seats. Go to fillthestadium.com. Mickey Weston is our guest here on Sports Spectrum. We're going to talk about UPI in a second, how you got involved, because it sounds like you had an idea that you, like you said, you got a degree in Christian counseling. So you were thinking, I want to go into this world of mentoring, ministry, whatever it is. But where does the faith take shape? Tell us your Jesus story and kind of how it forms for you.
Well, I did not grow up in a Christian home. It was nominally religious, but my parents got ticked at a young age. And so growing up, my gods were football, basketball, and baseball. And then as a teenager, my peers became my gods. But I remember when I was 16, just felt like something was missing in my life, didn't know what it was. So on my own, I started to go to church, not a church that talks about a relationship, but it's where most of my friends went.
Sure.
And I would go there, and I knew there was something to this Jesus. I would sit in the pew, and I would look at the cross, and I knew there was something there, but I didn't have anyone to tell me what it was. And so for 2 years through high school, I got up every Sunday morning, went to church, but I was still at the parties on Friday and Saturday night. And then went to Eastern Michigan University on a baseball scholarship, academic scholarship. And a guy came and shared with our team from a ministry called Campus Crusade for Christ, or Crew now. And a swimmer shared his testimony about how he had tried everything, but nothing worked until he entered a personal relationship with Christ. And as he was talking, my heart was beating. And so after that meeting, I set up a meeting with campus director a week later on February 15th, 1980. He came to my dorm room a Friday afternoon, Jones Hall, room 102, and laid out the 4 spiritual laws, which is like knowing God personally, and went through the gospel with me. And I responded at about 4:30 in the afternoon and placed my faith and trust in Christ on that day. And then Dave Borum, who led me to Christ, discipled me for the next 2 years. Spent time twice a week. One time a week, he would teach me the word, teach me how to feed myself. And then the other time, he would take me out on cold calls on campus to share the gospel. Wow. And the first few times I fell flat on my face. Dave was like, hey, share, what happened to you? And I, and so God used that to challenge me to really find a way to communicate the gospel, to memorize his word. And that became the passion of my life, of sharing the gospel and making Christ known. And then that just translated into baseball, of wanting to be a witness, and really saw myself as a missionary. My wife and I saw ourselves as missionaries in the game of baseball as we were playing.
What was that like, trying to navigate the worlds of developing a sinker, developing a major league pitch, and be competitive, and having that, that idea of wanting to still be excellent at what you do, but not allowing baseball to become your God, like you said, when you were growing up, and being intentional about your faith, and still being, a minor leaguer for a lot of years before you get to the major leagues? What were those years like, kind of navigating baseball and faith and intersecting those two worlds as a pro?
The first 5 years, we were the only believers on the team.
Wow.
And our fellowship came through local churches. We sought it out, and God supplied it. The chaplain for the team really was my source, a great source of encouragement for me. That's why I love doing that with the White Sox, because I know early on in my career, that was really my only source of encouragement, besides the local church. And so cool thing is we developed friendships all over the country that we still are in touch with people from those times. But I think God takes us through times like that to develop our trust in him and to realize that he really is the only source of hope. The game doesn't have it, isn't going to provide it. There's so many ups and downs in the game. And I loved playing the game, but the game left me wanting many a night when I gave up that home run that cost us a game or whatever. But it also provided a source of a lot of enjoyment. So I think going through the minor leagues, I really don't even think that I was thinking about the major leagues until I got to the upper levels, and it was close. But even then, I think that looking back in my career, I think the Lord allowed me to make it to the major leagues to do what I'm doing today.
Right.
Because a lot of people in the world are into titles and God's into testimonies. But a title will sometimes open a door. And because I have that title as a former major leaguer,
right,
it's opened up a lot of doors around the world to be able to proclaim Christ. And
that's really good. I love that.
For it.
Yeah, I love that, especially that the idea, because titles are something we all strive for. And I would say even in the Christian space, a lot of people, get caught up in their titles of director of this, or, if you're a pastor, senior pastor and author and speaker, a lot of pastors are author and speakers. So they get caught up in their titles, but it is the testimonies that separate it. I think it's the stories. It's the real tangible proof that Jesus came and changed you from the inside out. Take me to, I don't want to lose track of this because you mentioned the date, June 18th, 1989, and you get the call and you make your major league debut. Take me through what that day was like for you. What do you remember about that day, especially being with Baltimore at this point, not with the Mets anymore, the Orioles? And obviously your faith is growing at that point too. So it's got to be kind of a cool moment for you, especially seeing God kind of bless you, I guess, with this opportunity when you've kind of been grinding for so many years.
It was unreal. The night before I was supposed to start in Omaha, and I got called into the office, and basically the manager said, well, you have the option. You can either start tonight or you can get on a plane for Baltimore. And I'm like, what? And so it was a dream come true for Lisa and I. I mean, that was really the cool thing. I still remember the phone call of trying to find her. She was actually at her grandma's to let her know that what we had worked so hard together for, because we always considered it our career. It wasn't my career. It was our career, because I couldn't have done it without her. Sure. And so the next day, waking up in Baltimore, I flew that night and got in late, woke up the next morning, and the pitching coach, Al Jackson, who I knew for 6.5 years with the Mets, picked me up at the hotel, took me to the field, and just to see a major league uniform, sitting in my locker, and then walking out onto the field was like immediate great praise to the Lord that I was even there, playing catch in the outfield, and early in the game having to go get coffee for the guys, the veterans in the bullpen. But then came in the seventh inning, and the phone rings, and Weston, get up. And then it just, you go into the player mode, you forget about all that stuff, and it's just a matter of getting ready to go in the game. And thankfully, the Lord just gave me blinders, because it was a sellout crowd, 46,000 people.
Wow.
And the Oakland A's, with McGuire and Canseco, and I came into, we had a 1-run lead, and I was able to shut them down for 3 innings. And the last guy I had to face was McGuire, and probably the biggest guy I've ever seen put on a uniform. And it looked like he was swinging a tree trunk.
Yep.
But getting him to hit a weak pop up to center field and winning the game, and then Frank Robinson put his arm around me and said, "Nice job, buddy, but you got to go back to AAA." Oh. He was joking.
Yeah,
he was actually joking, but I was like, "What?" But the praise really to the Lord, and getting a chance to be interviewed after the game and giving glory to God for the journey that He had taken us on was just magical.
And being 28 years old, you probably appreciated it a lot more than if you were, 22, just coming up right after you get drafted, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And when you're around those guys, and I see that, I watch that now, these guys that are 28, 29. One guy for Atlanta this year, it had been, I think, almost 10 years in between times for Casimir. That's just a lot of people don't see the journey that a lot of players go on. They see the young kids coming up and very quickly, and they have exceptional talent. But for a lot of guys, it's a lot more grinding it out and sticking with it. And I think that made me appreciate it that much more. And even to this day, appreciate that the Lord even opened that door.
Do you got anything from that game? Do you still have the ball, the jersey, all that stuff?
I've got the jersey, but not the ball. I have no idea what happened to that save. Because I got a save for the game.
Right. Wow.
And actually got a win the next outing.
Okay.
In Seattle.
But you don't have the ball. Isn't that like the big thing now? Like, a guy gets a hit, you got to give him the ball.
Absolutely. And I'm sure they gave me the ball at the end of the game. I just have no idea what the heck I did with it.
That's awesome. I don't mind that. It's good. It was also 30 plus years ago too, Mickey Weston. So it's interesting to think about that. I do want to ask you, as your playing career comes, to an end, as you alluded to earlier, and going back to school and kind of preparing yourself for ministry, when does UPI come into the picture here? Because I love that you and your wife really do this together too. And your wife, Lisa's dynamite, and she connects with the ladies in such an awesome way and does such a good job. Walk me through that decision, being called to UPI and going from being a player to being someone who ministers to players.
Well, that actually started as a player back in 1986. After my first year in AA, we had started going to PAO conferences as newlyweds in 1984. And in 1986, I went and I met Tom Roy, was at PAO, and he was a founder of UPI, founded it in 1980. And it was right after that conference that I get a call from him and said, "Listen, a guy can't go on a trip to Korea because one of the things baseball or UPI does in the off seasons, we take guys overseas on short-term missions." And so he said, "It's already paid for. Would you like to go to South Korea?" And I'm like, "Yeah, would love to." And so I went with Tom Roy, Jose Alvarez, Harold Reynolds, and Dave Valley. Harold and Dave were playing for Seattle at the time. And that's where God opened my eyes up to the world of how he could use a little white ball to open up opportunities to proclaim Christ. And so I was hooked. And so the next 2 years I played winter ball in the Dominican and actually ministered with UPI when they came to the Dominican. But then starting in 89, I started leading trips for UPI during the off season. And would go to places like Russia and Thailand and, the Dominican. I've been to the Dominican, I think, 20 times. But over the years, I've been to 42 different countries around the world.
Wow.
Using baseball as a tool to proclaim Christ. And so I got hooked with UPI right away. And then so right as I was ending towards the end of my career, in 96 was my last year playing. And I got asked by Tom, or Lisa and I got asked by Tom to come on part-time, that I would either play or coach during the season, but then in the off season, I would be in the office directing the international side of UPI. And so we prayed about it and felt like that was God's leading. And so I actually retired at the end of 96 and got a call immediately from the New York Mets to become a pitching coach. And so I was a pitching coach in the minor leagues for 3 years with the Mets while I was on staff with UPI. And then after 3 years, Tom challenged us to come on full time.
Wow.
And we never looked back.
That's amazing. And plus you get to chapel as well with UPI. You're not just leading these missions trips in the off season. UPI, for people listening, by the way, stands for Unlimited Potential Incorporated. But it's also an opportunity for you to be a chaplain and serve in a baseball environment with the White Sox and minister to players. What has that journey been like? Because that's a different animal than, I think it's different because you're in this day-to-day grind, month-to-month grind that we're in right now in the midst of a baseball season. And you're the chaplain, and now you're responsible for ministering and developing relationships and in some cases discipling, I would imagine, some players. What's that journey been like since 2003? I think you told me that you took that position over.
It was actually for a lot of our UPI staff, all of the UPI staff, 7 guys are on our staff are all former players. So we're comfortable going in there. We already know the do's and don'ts. And so it really has helped us to be able to navigate going in. And, initially I thought my ministry was going to be just to the players. And so I thought back to when I was a player. How did the chaplain minister to me? And he was available. And so that's a lot of just being available to the players. They don't need another fan. They don't need me to give them pats on the back for how they're doing on the field, although there are times where you really pick them up when they're down.
Sure.
But they need someone that's going to give them the word, and that's going to love on them, that's going to love on them whether they're doing well or they're doing poorly. And so that's where I think it's an advantage going in, is that I can love on these guys without expecting anything in return. I don't want anything from them. I want to give to them. And that's where the players see it. They see a difference. I think even as a former player, I'm a little skeptical anytime someone wants to get close to me.
Sure.
And so the players are that way too, because it's usually they want something from you. And so that when we can go and say, listen, I don't want anything from you. I just want to give to you and want to be your friend. And it's awesome. I love doing it. I love going in and messing with the guys, getting guys.
Okay, so how so? What do you mean by messing with them, Mickey?
Just because you know the game, you know how it goes. A guy can be going well, and that's when he's an easier target. You don't mess with a dude that's going bad. But where you can just poke fun at him. He did something on the field that everybody saw there, or that maybe the average fan missed, but you catch because you're a ball player. And so being able to utilize that to open up relationships with guys. And so
that's the key, right? That's the key.
Relationships.
Yeah.
It's developing relation. And for them to know that, when the chaplain comes in, sometimes they think it's, he's wearing a collar and, it's just,
yeah.
You want them to know, hey, I'm a regular guy. I'm a former ball player. I've lived in your shoes. And I'm just coming to minister to you in some way, shape, or form. And so I'll go to all the guys in the clubhouse and say, listen, I'd love to have you at chapel. Even guys that I know that are adamant against it, I'll still approach them and I'll say, listen, is there something I can pray for you? Is there something going on in your family that I can lift up?
How's that received for guys that may be a little apprehensive to the whole church or chapel thing?
A lot of times guys are like, oh, I'm good. Thanks, man. Appreciate it. Most of the guys are they're not in your face.
Yeah.
But they'll say, no, I'm good. Thanks. Or guys say, man, actually, hey, could you pray about this? I know you're a believer. Would you pray about this for my family? And when you do that, a lot of times that opens up a door, and then go back to them and say, listen, I've been praying about this. What's happened with that? Or I've gone to guys and said, listen, I'm going to keep asking you to come to chapel until you tell me to get out of your face. I care about you. And a lot of those guys have ended up coming.
Wow.
But a lot of our ministry is to pour into the Christian leaders in the clubhouse, because they live with the guys, basically 12, 14 hours a day. And so it's to pour into a couple of the key guys, because they're going to be around them all the time.
Right. You're discipling the disciple makers, right?
Yeah. We're almost like a pastor equipping the people for the work of the ministry.
Yeah.
And I love discipleship. I mean, that's the key. We're a discipleship ministry. Excuse me, because God Dave Boren poured into me for 2 solid years, and that's why I'm where I am today. And so if I can do that for others, to help them along on the journey, then I believe that's what God has called all of us to be part of his great commission.
What's the secret sauce? And it might just be relationships. It probably is, but to get guys to open up, because, and this, and I've been around enough athletes now too for the last 20 years to know they are walking into whatever room they walk into with their full guard up, because everybody, like you said, is asking usually for something from them. You meet a fan, it's, can you sign this? Can you say hello to my friend Billy, my daughter Jill, or whatever? It's always asking for something. And what I love about the ministry that Sports Spectrum is a part of, with UPI, with PAO, is we just try to serve and give back and not ask for anything except maybe a little bit of time like this to tell their story, but not to ask for anything in return. But what has been the secret sauce to getting them to open up and to be able to not just disciple, but to be transparent? Because it's easy to put on that facade, that mask, I think, when you're living such an outwardly public life as a professional baseball player.
I think it really is what you said, relationship. And also sometimes spending enough time with them that you're able to earn their trust and allowing them to see you in other environments. So a lot of times I'll go on the road. Obviously haven't been able to for the last year.
Right.
But I'll go on the road and I'll set up lunches or breakfasts. And I remember this one particular guy that hadn't been coming. His wife was a part of Lisa's Bible study. Lisa is the women's ministry coordinator for Baseball Chapel.
Yep.
But she also does the Bible studies for the White Sox. And his wife was coming to Bible study, but he was not coming to chapel. But we had this breakfast in Detroit, and with a couple of the other Christian ball players, and this guy came, and we were sitting at the table, and he orders the chicken waffle, which is like 2,000 calories. Well, I order it as well because I like it. But I told him, I looked at him, I said, if you say a word to your wife and it gets back to my wife, we're done. And just joking about, we laughed and all that. From that point on, he started coming to chapel.
Huh. There was a trust factor and a relationship factor.
There was he saw me, I think partly was he saw me in a different environment. The meal, none of the meal was really talked about spiritual things. We didn't talk about spiritual things. We just talked about interest and stuff.
Sure.
And I think it gave him a different view of what is Christianity all about. And so sometimes I think guys need to see that we're real people. We can talk about real things, but the nuts and bolts of life are going to come down to a relationship with Christ. But we have to develop relationship sometimes before we can get to that point.
He is Mickey Weston. He's the executive director of UPI, the former Major League Baseball pitcher, and now the chaplain with the Chicago White Sox. My last question as we wind down here, really enjoyed this conversation like I thought I would with you, Mickey. What's God showing you and teaching you right now? That's a question we ask everybody on this podcast, but with all that you've been going through, you talked about, the challenges I have to imagine even just in the last 15 months being a chaplain for a baseball team and ministering to baseball players in the midst of a pandemic with COVID and the coronavirus and all these things. What's the Lord shown you and taught you most, I think, when you think back over these last 15 months?
Flexibility.
Yeah.
One of the key principles in ministry is that we are not in control and He is. And we've got to be willing to adjust to Him. This pandemic did not catch Him by surprise.
Right.
And so we've had to make adjustments. Last year, when everything shut down, we just really prayed about it as a staff, and we began over 35 discipleship Bible studies. Over 200 players, coaches, umpires were in Zoom. I wish I would have known about Zoom. I would have invested in Zoom.
Same here.
Back then. But also, I think a lot of it is deepening trust in the Lord, of saying, Lord, I trust you for this. It's funny that you mentioned about what has He been teaching lately. I taught on Philippians 1 to the White Sox the first week of the season, and share with them, verse 6 says that I'm confident of this very thing, that He who began the good work in you will perfect it until the day of Christ Jesus. And I said, well, how does He perfect His character in our lives? And typically it's through difficult circumstances. And the rest of Philippians 1, Paul is saying, listen, I'm in prison, and it's advancing the gospel. And believers are becoming even more bold as a result of my attitude and how I'm handling this difficult circumstance. And so I shared that with the White Sox, and I said, how do you handle the difficulties that come your way in life? Do you handle them with grace and trust and endurance, or are you complaining and discouraged and walking away from Christ? Well, right after that, as you know, the week after that, my wife and I were in an accident that totaled our vehicle, and praise God, we were safe. We were bruised, but He protected us. The next day, her father had a stroke, and he's fine. It was just a TIA. And then just a couple of days later, we found out we had COVID. Yeah. Which takes me away from the White Sox because I can't be at the stadium while I'm recovering from it. But it was like the Lord sometimes brings circumstances into our lives, especially if you're teaching like you have, to say, okay, is this, you teach this to other guys, but is it real in your own life? Yeah. And so I think God engineers circumstances for us to grow and to trust in Him, and to realize He is in control. And even when we feel like everything around us is out of control, He is in control, and we can trust Him. He's faithful. He's true.
That's really good. He's Mickey Weston, Executive Director of UPI, a former Major League Baseball pitcher. Thanks, Mickey. Really appreciate it. If people wanted to learn about UPI, what's the website they can go to just to check it out and see all the great work you guys are doing?
Real simple, just www.upi.org.
UPI.org. You got it, my friend. Thanks for being here, my friend. Great to connect with you. And hopefully I'll see you in a few months at the PAO. Hopefully we're having a conference this year. I think we are. So we're excited, but hopefully we'll see you then. And thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Jason. Pleasure to be with you.
That was Mickey Weston, and many thanks to Mickey for being here on the show today. His website, again, upi.org, if you want to learn more about the ministry, the baseball ministry that Mickey is a part of, upi.org. And thanks to Mickey for being here today on the show. I love him and Lisa. They do such an amazing job in ministry, taking care of those baseball players and feeding them the gospel. And if you're ever wondering behind the scenes how guys are being fed in their faith during a long season, well, look at the Chicago White Sox and a guy like Mickey Weston, who is making a difference in those players' lives. So Mickey's a great guy, and just appreciate him sharing his story here on Sports Spectrum. We also appreciate you for tuning in. Thank you. Do us a favor, click that subscribe button so that you never miss an episode of Sports Spectrum's podcast, and tell someone, if you could, about the show. Send them the link to this episode. Check out all of our other content that we have, all of our other podcasts, and tell someone about Sports Spectrum. It helps get the word out. And if you know someone who loves sports and loves Jesus, this is the place to turn. Let them know about Sports Spectrum and our Sports Spectrum podcast. We do appreciate you. Make sure you check out our website, sportspectrum.com, and hopefully you'll tune in next time for another episode of the Sports Spectrum podcast. My name is Jason Romano. I am the director of media here at Sports Spectrum, and I am truly grateful that you tuned into the show today. We'll see you next time right here on Sports Spectrum. Have a great rest of your day.